I just hi to everybody on Zoom. I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted because we have a very, very big day today. A number of us, in collaboration with groups, other groups across the county, decided 2.5 weeks ago that we should do one of these hands-off events. I don't know if you know that it's a national movement. It's a national day of action called for by Indivisible and Move On and the Working Families Party and other national organizations, feeling that we really have to have a nationwide, strong, visible presence pushing back against the fascist takeover of our country. So a couple weeks ago, a bunch of us decided, let's do that. And now we have something like 2,000 people who are expected to come. So, right? Thank you. Ginger Kinney from Michigan Resistance is one of our co-partners. Indivisible is what local Indivisibles are our co-partners, and we have a whole bunch. So thank you so much. Just because of this, we're not meeting in here, obviously, with 2,000 people. We're meeting outside. We're meeting outside. So we have a contract to make the weather nice in about 10 minutes. So we're gonna be there. Oh, it's going to be great with weather. We need the parking lot to be cleared. So if you're parked in this parking lot, you need to be out by 12:15. Okay. Thank you, Tom. And I think that's just what I've got so far. And I don't see Debbie here. Do we have any of the committee chairs who want to speak about what you're doing, speak about what we're doing next? Any questions? Why don't we just, what questions do you have about what the party's up to and how you can be part of it? Thank you, Connie. You know, Sharon Simonton is our volunteer coordinator. How would you like to be part of it?
Well, a couple things. I'd like to know how so many people, apparently we missed a lot of people in the election, and to whom aren't the Dems listening? And I'm wondering how we can get to know the people who voted for Trump. How come we're not listening to them? And why did they do it? And what's behind all that? And we just missed that whole level of people that voted for him and still believe in his message. What's going on there? And we are for the down and out folks. And something happened. We're not speaking to the people in poverty the right way.
Anybody? I'm not an absolute expert on any of this. Anybody else wants to weigh in? That's cool. I'll tell you personally. I mean not personally, but the Republicans have been working to divide this country for at least 30 years, right? I mean, when did Rush Limbaugh come on the scene? Remember? Well, I mean, it's a really complex picture. I mean, we had the Reagan administration. Jeff, feel free to speak up. We had the Reagan administration open up the airways so nobody, anybody could say anything. And then you have very quickly Rush Limbaugh, who is full of hate, and then but entertaining, right? And then you have Newt Gingrich intentionally, explicitly creating of the other party, making the other party enemies. Not just we're all Americans, but we disagree about how to get things done, but making them enemies. And they have been driving this for a very long time. And I think for my part, I think we've been asleep at the wheel for a lot of the time. We've been playing by old rules. Jeff, do you want to say? Oh, thank you, Marion.
I think this is a perfect time to ask that question, because the tension that's been created spurs these thoughts. And so participating in the events like this is evidence that someone has been listening and wondering what's going on, and this is a perfect time to give the answer that Jeff or any of the others who've been involved in the movement to answer that question, because I believe that there are Republicans out there who are now beginning to wonder, why am I still doing this? And I think we can provide that answer in a conversation with them.
I'll just say something really quickly because I'm probably going to be talking a lot later. That's why I don't want to take up too much time. But I will say that one of the things that Democrats used to be better at was developing a sense of commonality and unity among the working class. And what's happened in the last several years, really my whole lifetime, and I came of age politically much in the 80s and 90s, so I know what you're talking about, Theresa, is that the Republicans have done a really good job of dividing people who have common cause based on class, but dividing them based on race or gender or other wedges. And so they've been very, very successful at driving these wedges. And I think that one of the things we could do to be more successful, in addition to having a positive message of our own, is to find ways to bring folks together who have economic common cause and show that Democrats are the ones doing that. And, you know, I think that some of the ways that we have communicated recently have missed opportunities to show that what people want is pretty similar across the country, across different communities, across the world.
Yeah. We've got right up here. Thank you. And then
Okay.
Janet.
Right here. I think I worked at the
Put it a
Democratic
little closer to your mouth, would you?
I worked at the Democratic office in Ypsi for several months before the election, and Margaret Schenkler was one of the lead people there. And I became good friends with her, and I sent her a message early on.
That's a good point. Cheryl, let me get to Janet first, okay?
Janet.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Also, you know what? It's way easier. Republicans are united by hatred, and they're also almost all white, right? And we, you know, we are a very diverse party with very diverse opinions, and we have so many people that we include and want to empower, do empower. And it's way, way harder to hold a coalition like that together than it is to hold a bunch of people together who are motivated by hatred. So that's a thing too. And then the whole media environment, but we'll get to that. Janet, Frank, you're not next.
Yeah.
Over here. Yeah, go ahead, Janet.
I'd just like to add a different strand that goes in to make the rope, which is campaign finance, donations, people, the fact that we only now can elect to Congress and to the Senate, basically people who can afford to run. And yeah, they are unable to resist the pressure of donations, and therefore working people in every class, I think, do not see themselves being defended from the predatory practices of so many corporations. So that's another big thread that we need to be able to address. If we can't fix campaign finance, I'm not going to get out of that.
Hang on, Cheryl's next.
Cheryl, all right.
Yeah, I'm telling you, we all know Citizens United.
Oh, man. I
mean,
missed half the room. There's at least 50.
Wait, who's
It's
speaking?
full. Sorry.
Speak. Yeah, can we not have that? Cheryl?
All right, good morning. I'm a child of the civil rights movement. I was in the civil rights movement as because of my age, I did voter registration. And back then, 18, you couldn't vote. I was a senior in high school, and you couldn't vote. So I didn't get to vote until I was 21. And I learned back then to fight for your rights. I'm not listening, no disrespect, to anyone who's trying to erase my people's history out of this country. And all I heard from the other side was hate and retribution. I heard from this side peace, love, and unity. I wonder what's going on with them. My people voted in this election that we had. We wonder what happened to the rest of the folks.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Dina.
Mm.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, Dana.
So I think a lot of good points have been made. And I know we're, having a discussion about what it looks like to try and reach out to Republicans. I agree with your point. But I also think that we need to have a discussion about the folks that just aren't voting. Right. The voters that feel left behind. I feel like I've told this story over and over again. I did a lot of campaigning in Superior Township, particularly like in Sycamore Meadows and Danbury Greens. And a number of folks that had told me, hey, I don't even know what a trustee is. This is the first time somebody has knocked on my door. I think, particularly like from the Democratic Party or both parties, but since I'm a Democrat, I'm going to speak to the Democratic Party. I think we could do a better job of reaching out to voters who simply feel left behind and don't feel like any party is serving them. So I would like for us to think more about what that looks like moving forward. And I know in Superior Township, we're actually going to be planning a town hall where we can have, reach out to residents that don't typically get listened to. And so we would be excited to have everybody attend that once we have those plans finalized as well. Thank you.
Great. And Annie?
Annie?
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know if I'll be at the rally later, and hopefully somebody will mention this, but there's a lot of organizations that are impacted by the cuts from federal funding, like Meals on Wheels, our food banks through food gatherers, and we're expecting that a lot of the housing providers that keep people in family shelter or provide folks with resources for rapid rehousing are going to be impacted. So one way to get more people to vote in the next election is to help the people who are going to be the most vulnerable by the must cuts to human service funding. So food gatherers, Alpha House, SOS, Community Services, there's a lot of organizations. And so instead of donating money when you get emails from Democrats every day asking, you could donate to organizations that are actually helping the most vulnerable people.
I want to point out Annie Somerville is a member of the County Board of Commissioners. Over there, Jeff is our state senator. And Dana Green is a supervisor, not a supervisor, I'm sorry.
Trustee.
Trustee, thank you, of Superior Township. And our Congresswoman Debbie Dingell is here. Debbie, come up, please. While Debbie's making her way to the podium, I want to say Debbie is the most hardworking person in Congress, for sure. Debbie has done everything we want her to do and more. And she has about 15 things to go to today, right?
Morning, everybody. I just want to say the 6th district is going to be well represented with hands off. There are rallies right out here at 1 o'clock. Saline, Chelsea, Dexter, Manchester, Milan are all having rallies. And then Belleville and Canton and Novi and Downriver, and I'm forgetting one, and I'm going to try to make them all, but I may not. We were only all closer. But, look, I don't even know where to start, because right now, I mean, if you miss an hour, and you don't watch the news, you miss what the next thing is that's happened. And one thing, and I'm going to talk about it, and maybe I'm doing my dry run for this afternoon, although I'm more talking to you about what's happening, is that we got to find a way to be together. We got to find a way to be united. Circular firing squads right now are not going to help us win the House in 2 years. And as we talk about, then I'll talk about what's happening. I mean, what happened to the stock market in the last 48, well, it's 36 or 72 hours, but Thursday and Friday has to scare the shit out of people across this country and make them think at least once, maybe twice, about the man who is president. And I recommend nobody look at their retirement account or their stock holdings, because we'll all just be thoroughly depressed, in the suicide hotline, which isn't being staffed, which is just one of the many things. So it's a really serious time. But, you know, I always go to Dexter Forum before I come to this meeting. And Dexter Forum it got pretty hot and intense, and 7/8 of the room, probably 9/10 of the room took offense. But I talked to you about people who voted for Donald Trump, and there were 3 people there who talked about, I mean, he worked for the auto industry. He lost his job. He saw the plant closed. He saw the jobs go to Mexico. And he defended everything that Donald Trump was doing on tariffs, and that we needed to do this to make this country better. And there are people who believe that in this country. And we got to figure out a way that we can talk to them. I'm actually someone who has said to you, tariffs are a tool in the toolbox, but you have to implement them strategically, not chaotically. And you have to combine it with an industrial policy that it supports manufacturing, and you can't do it overnight. An auto company cannot build a new plant overnight. If everything went right, and when's the last time anybody saw anything go absolutely right? It takes 2.5 to 3 years. So all of that is going on. And then DEI also came up at this meeting, and this is where I could sit quietly and other people took over. A woman, there's someone who, let's just say, had strong feelings that probably don't agree with most of the people in this room. And we need to understand there are people, there's a reason Donald Trump got elected, because there are people who feel strongly that they have been left behind, that nobody cares about them. And we got to find a way. You're not going to get, quite frankly, the people that I was in the room with this morning, but there are a lot of people that think nobody cares about them, that nobody's fighting for them. And I've been in union halls. I try to go in a union hall every weekend, and people are really scared about what's going to happen to their costs, what's going to be the impact on the economy. But they also say to me, at least somebody cares. Somebody's fighting for us. And that's what we have to address, is how we show people that we really care, that we are addressing their problems. And we got to address their problems. Democrats have to have a Project 2028. We got to have a Project 2026. We got to understand people's issues. We got to talk about jobs. We got to talk about those issues at the kitchen table, but we got to deliver. And it's really hard right now. People are very frustrated. Democrats, let's go back to Democrats, not the 3 people that disrupted this morning. I'm out there. I'm doing town halls, and Jeff's here. We've had a thread. We have spent all week trying to find a date, because I think it's really good to have the federal and the state legislatures at these town hall meetings. And the fact, here is a reality. 42% of Michigan's state budget is federal dollars. So, and I've said to Greg, who's at the back of the room, Greg, there aren't more federal dollars coming into the county. We got to talk about this and what's going to happen. So a lot of things that we all care about are really going to be impacted. And how do we fight for them? And you don't, look, I'm out there fighting for everything. And so you can feel frustrated, because call me. I want to hear from you. I'm out there. Your state reps and your state senators want to hear from you. But like, we're probably the group of people that are fighting the hardest at the federal level and the state legislative level, because we do understand. We have to figure out how we get 3 the governor and I talked this week, and we've got to get, they swore in faster than they've ever done before the votes were even certified, the 2 new Republican members from Florida that replaced Waltz and Gates. But we need 7 or 8 Republican votes to win on anything, which, by the way, you saw this week, can't keep track anymore. On Tuesday, they are not trying to do massive proxy voting, nothing like that. 2 mothers, Brittany Patterson from Colorado and Luna from Florida, had new babies and want to be able to take 8 weeks to take care of their children and do proxy voting. And Mike Johnson does not support that, won't. Even Donald Trump, who I don't trust on anything, said, I don't understand why new mothers can't have proxy voting. But when he didn't win, when 8 Republicans voted with the Democrats, Mike Johnson shut the House down and there was no more business this week. And why? Because it's a privileged resolution and he has to bring it up within 2 legislative business days. And he was not going to let there be a legislative business day that has to come up. But so we need to get 3 Republicans from Michigan because we should be able to do it. So I'm going to give a challenge to everybody here is to talk to your friends, talk to people you know throughout the state. One of them is chair of the Borders Us, used to have Western Washtenaw. I would ask people to please, someone very nicely videoed me and took a videotape and gave it to the media, and media printed what I told people. So you got to just expect that this day and age. But the chair of the Ed and Labor Committee is right next door to us. Now, he's not actually, I'm about to get in trouble like I always do. He's probably not on the target list I would do of 3 people because I think he's very unlikely to change, but I think he needs to know how people are being impacted and affected, and you need to communicate with them. The 10th district, the 10th district seat, Macomb County, John James, he's probably running for governor. He is one person that he needs to really understand what happens to people if Medicaid gets cut. He needs to understand the ramifications of what we're doing when we're eliminating CDC staffs and FDA staffs and bird flu and the people that track bird flu and infectious disease. So the 10th district, Tom Barrett in the old Alyssa Slotkin seat, 7th, is that 7th? 7th district. And then Jack Bergman and Bill Huizenga. One's probably has more of a heart, but one's in a targeted, or it's going to be shortly, a targeted House seat. So we need to, those are places to target and to put our efforts. And I'll talk more. How many of you are going to the rally at 1? So I don't want to give that speech twice to you. I'm going to do hash bash and then I'm running here. And then I'm going to try to hit the other 9. But it's crazy in Washington right now. I think that, Cory Booker gave everybody a lift, and being on that floor for 25 hours, I cried when he finished. I really did. Somebody said to me at the Dexter Forum, why can't the House do that? Well, we can't talk for more than 5 minutes. They have what they call the magic minute for Hakeem, and that's it. And I'm not sure they'd let the magic minute go for 25 hours. How many remember when we took over the floor on guns a number of years ago? So, we're talking about lots of different ideas, but Mike Johnson, I think, expects us to try to do that, and Sergeant at Arms is ready to arrest us. And but we need to be, I'm going to go back and say to you again, litigate, legislate, educate, advocate, communicate. And today, I do believe Donald Trump is somebody who does not want to be disliked. He likes to be Mr. Popular. And when he sees the rallies today across the country, I'm really proud the 6 has as many as it does. We are a district where people make their voices heard. But I'm hoping his rich friends have to be bitching at him about the state of the stock market. And the fact of the matter is he probably listens to them more than he listens to us. Musk's Tesla is the least popular car in this country. That makes me very happy. But I think as we see people take to the streets across the country, I hope that that is sending a message, and that is part of what we need to do. And we need to, Annie talked about what was happening on housing yesterday. The secretary, there's so much to talk about. We've seen the cuts at the VA hospital. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs came here on Monday. I was at the rally on Saturday, being me, but then hoping I wasn't so me that I didn't get uninvited on Monday. He promised to protect the veterans, but it's bullshit, because yesterday they shut down a program that helps veterans that need assistance stay in their homes, and he eliminated the program yesterday, which most people don't even know. There is so much happening that you can't keep track of what is being hurt and what is being impacted. And so we've got to try to be targeted and effective and get people's attention. The House is out next Thursday, as is the Senate. We are going to do, anybody has ideas, I want to work with you. The 15th is going to be a day of action on Social Security. He says he's not going to cut Social Security. Bullshit. He's closed 1,000 offices, fired 7,000 people, and seniors can't call an office and get any kind of help. That is cutting Social Security, making people not be able to get the help. And you have a Secretary of Commerce who's so empathetic and understands what's happening with seniors, that says a senior anybody who calls and says they're in trouble is lying and is not telling the truth. My mother can live without a check for this month. Yeah, your husband's a billionaire. This is what we're dealing with. And Rashida and I did a rally yesterday downtown with the Social Security people. So we're going to do a Social Security Day of Action on April 15th, a Medicaid Day of Action on the 17th. And I did an event. I actually got Michigan. Okay, you want me to behave, but no, you don't. I got Michigan to agree that we could do it at Michigan, and the governor and I did a Medicaid with all of the children's hospitals around the state of what would happen in this state if Medicaid got cut. We got to do, all of you working on that, have to do that. And then the next week, we're going to do the whole week on economics, the cost of living, and show what's happening to people on the cost of living. And I would love to work with all and every one of you. Annie talked about food. Food, the USDA has cut off the people who are hungry and need help. The numbers rising. At the same time, they're reducing money to all of our food banks. And the biggest problem right now is these people believe in retribution. They put a target on people's backs. So our job is, Jeff and I and the state legislators work together, and Greg and Annie, and how do we try to help the groups? How do we fight to protect what they have and not have them become the target of further cuts of retribution? So, hey, we all need to stay energized, engaged. I can talk to you about freedom of speech, due process, each agency. There's too much. Being here today, being at these hands-off rallies today matters. There'll be lots of rallies, I know, in the next month. Town halls, we're going to try to do smaller community town halls. We're working at getting one in Superior, which I hope we can get done in April. We're going to do one on Western Washtenaw side. I think we're close to getting a date. We're really working this. And if you want us in a smaller setting, let us know. So I'll take questions. There's so much. You just try to touch.
Hold on 1 second. Oh.
Well, we try to post them everywhere. Once we get them, Theresa puts them out, what's his I'm so tired. But it's on my website. All the state reps put it on their website. We put it in the paper. We put it on the radio. We put it everywhere that we can. But if you're here, it means you've got the Washtenaw Dems website, and every time one gets scheduled, it's there. And you can go to my website, any of the state reps. We got to make it easier. One of the things we have to do is to create an echo chamber like the Republicans do. So when we get things, we got to help people get followers, lift it up, send things out. Every one of us has followers, send it out, get them to spread it. We need to create a Democratic echo chamber the way the Republicans have.
Other questions, Debbie, Cheryl?
All right, 1 second here.
Hi, Debbie. Hi, Debbie. I just wanted to know, like, when Dems go into the red states town hall meetings, when they go to their meetings, there are two things I don't hear in those meetings. They're talking to empty chairs and all of this. I don't hear recall and impeach. Are those two still available?
I've asked about recalls on congressionals, and it's like if there's a lawyer in here, it's really kind of almost impossible, right? Where's Sam?
Sam Bagenstos.
Yeah, Sam really, you can't, I've actually been asking. It just can't, why, Sam, can you explain that one? I mean, because
Hold on
I
one
actually have
second
asked,
here.
just so you know.
Yeah, it's just the way our Constitution is set up. There's no recall for Congress. There are recalls at the state level, but there's no recall for federal office in our system.
So I've been trying, just so you know. Don't spread that word, but on impeachment, you got to have the vote. So we don't control either chamber. So, you know, Al Green's looked at other people, but we don't vote. So either we got to get some Republicans to agree with us that we just, you do a privilege resolution, but you got to have enough people to get it to pass. Trust me.
Right here.
25th Amendment.
I'm going to let Sam answer that one. I mean, the problem is, here's the problem. You got to have to implement it. You got to have people.
So I may not have been listening. I really mean that. But what exactly is it we're asking for of whom?
Well, let him do the 26th
When we
Amendment.
call your colleagues' offices who currently are not helping us, what specifically do we really want? Not rather than just vent.
They're going to be defeated if they cut children's health care, if they cut a senior's Social Security, which they depend on to live. Take any of the stories that matter in that community, raise them up and say, how can you support this? This isn't what we want in our community. And stories matter.
I got nothing to add to what the Congresswoman said. I just think that everyone wants there to be a legal answer here. The law is not going to get rid of Donald Trump. It's going to be politics that gets rid of Donald Trump. 25th Amendment, like that requires a majority of his cabinet to vote to get rid, to vote to set him aside, or it requires Congress, just like impeachment would. It's right. It's the same thing. It's politics that's going to solve this problem.
Will you answer a question, because somebody probably has it, about his ability to run for a third term?
Yeah. Look. So the question is, can Donald Trump run for a third term? He's been floating this possibility, and we've seen this with him before. This is like how he tests the boundaries. It is totally clear. You can do some sharp lawyering and pretend that he could run for a third term. It's totally clear that on any reasonable reading of the constitutional text or the intent behind it, he can't. That doesn't mean he's not going to try, but it's going to require people to, make clear that the people will not accept this, really usurpation of a very important constitutional amendment. So no, he does not have the authority to do that.
May try to get a constitutional amendment through, but I want to say this to you. He can't. No. Now, he may get it through the House. If we don't filibuster that in the Senate, we'll never filibuster anything. And I trust the Senate. Cory Booker showed us. But even then, we haven't approved the ERA. Exactly. Because every state has to. Yeah. And it's how many years since?
3/4 of the states you need. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tom, would you get this young woman and then?
Oh,
and
yeah.
then, then we'll go to that side of the room.
Yep.
You two are next, okay? And then that will be it.
Hi. Thank you, Representative Dingell. I really appreciate you coming here. And I also call your office pretty often and I always get a warm reception. So I appreciate that.
It's important. We try.
There's something that I'm kind of worried about, and I'm not sure. I just want to know if people in DC are aware of or in your caucus are aware of, which is that Dr. Oz, who was just appointed to the Center for CMS, he can sort of administratively start automatically enrolling seniors into Medicare Advantage. That can be done without congressional sort of approval, just sort of on his own, he can do that. And then over time, there will be sort of attrition, more and more attrition. There's already 50% of Medicare funds go into Medicare Advantage, and there'll be attrition more and more into Medicare Advantage, which is privatized version with lower success rate in terms of health outcomes and services provided. And over time, there'll just be fewer and fewer people on Medicare, and then it'll sort of collapse and become totally privatized. So it's sort of within Dr. Oz's power to essentially wholesale privatize Medicare over his tenure, and that is very scary, and I don't feel like people are aware of it or are messaging about it, and I want some, I guess.
It's not quite that simple.
Okay.
Because you got Medicaid parts, you got different, yes, we are. The Democrats have been working on Medicare Advantage because it's very deceiving and it's not. I think that as he goes in there, we need to educate people. Everybody, by the way, needs to sign up, whether you want to receive Medicare or not. This is my public service announcement up for the day. When you turn 65, a lot of people don't know that. And if you do not do it within the first 9 months, after you turn 65, you will be penalized for the rest of your. So I just want to say that as people retire at 65, even if you're not going to receive it, you need to sign up for it. We're fine. We know that. Oz is going to be terribly, terribly scary. And we're going to try to hold him accountable. And when we start to go into markup in committee, we'll be doing things. We will make Republicans vote against Medicare. That's one of our, they figured it out, so I'm not giving something away. But yeah, that's one of our focuses. And you're correct. But he can't totally privatize it because everybody stays on the first part of Medicare.
Two final questions over here.
Good morning. I just would like to make a statement or a question. I noticed that a lot of meetings and a lot of things that I hear, they mention DEI in passing, but not what's going on with DEI. And I know that a lot of the DEI programs that were prevented, were stopped, was among the first when Trump started doing this. So what's going on with the DEI programs? And I know it's special education, I know it's food, I know it's breakfast, and I know that it affects the minority, it affects my community, it affects our community. How come you don't hear much about that?
Well, I actually talk about it a lot. I think, look, the very first weekend, like before the world really understood what was going to happen, but the NIH grants got DEI. Remember that the first action he took was to freeze grants in any way that were connected to DEI. I met with a researcher at NCI that had a cancer drug study and was fired because the protocol for her drug study said your population, your trial group, must reflect the population and include African Americans, et cetera, and got fired for that phrase. People do not understand that. And I was one of the people, I'm very close to the Tuskegee Airmen down in Detroit. And people just miss this, that they just were like eliminating the history of African Americans in the military and eliminated Tuskegee men. Now we got that put back. And then Jackie Robinson, they just tried to do that to Jackie Robinson in the grassroots. I did get upset about, I mean, I will say I had some hands-on in that. Thankfully, the country got outraged about Jackie Robinson and grassroots, and that was put back. And the state has, I mean, this is true. Now, I get why people are doing this, but, you know, when people like, so the state has wiped all of its websites clear of any DEI reference, which is true. Jeff knows it, because they could lose federal funding. Now, I know it's interesting to look, I'm going to get in trouble, but I'm just, if you look at Michigan and how they communicated it, and you look at Michigan Medical Center and how they communicated, you know that the medical school, I don't know if you've seen it, Jeff, the difference in I only learned this last weekend. You still know they have the values and they're fighting for it. I'm talking about freedom of speech, because look, as an elected official, I'm going to stand up for making sure that everybody is treated equally. John Dingell's most important vote in his career was his civil rights vote in the 60s, where everybody said he would lose for it. And he said, he ran against someone who voted against it, and he was proud of it. And I'm proud of that, and I'll talk about it. And we are being limited in freedom of speech. That is what's happening now. And you're getting but the University of Michigan gets billions of dollars from the federal government. And it's in the top 20 targets. Let's just be honest and real for Donald Trump. So I get what they're doing. I mean, the state of Michigan did it too. But we got to stand up for what matters. We got to stand up for our values. We cannot be afraid to speak up and speak out. And what he is doing is, in essence, silencing us. He is denying freedom of speech. So it's a hard place to be. So people like me have got to speak up and speak out, and I'm going to. But I also want to say that there are a whole lot of people that, I mean, when you talk to I was on campus I've been on campus. Last Saturday hit me a week ago. The DEI. So the kids were like super, but then the researchers are really like, we're going to lose a generation of researchers who don't want to be a ping pong ball. They don't know if their funding's going to be there. They don't know if their graduate programs are going to be paid for, whether their money's going to be there for research. And the foreign students are scared to death. And not just if you were from the Mideast. I called Ono and I said, you got to talk to these kids. Do you understand what they are doing right now? And I said this to Ono. I said this to him 3 weeks ago. I was really pissed on Saturday because they're going through the social media, anything anybody has said of every student that is here from a foreign country, every student. And if they don't like what you have said, they will. Not can, they will deport you. That, my friends, is not due process. It is not freedom of speech. It fights every fundamental pillar of our Constitution. And these kids are scared. They're scared to death. And that's the community we're living in right now. And I still have to go to the pancake breakfast, speak at Hash Bash, and be back at 1.
What the Republicans are doing is illegal by our Constitution. Our Constitution is the oldest Constitution in force in the world. It was not built to handle the computers. We are up against something that we've never seen before. Our government's being hacked. And you just stood up and said the law is not the answer, politics is. Sonia Sotomayor said that the people are the answer. You know, the answer in India was Gandhi, and Gandhi broke the law. The answer in South Africa was Nelson Mandela, and he broke the law. One of the pieces of the answer here was John Lewis, and he broke the law. I want to know, what does the answer look like? I don't think it is within the bounds of what we normally think of as legal, and I don't think what's happening to us is within the bounds of what we normally think is legal in the United States of America.
I'm going to ask Sam, but I want to say this. I'm going to have Sam, the lawyer, answer some of it. I'm not a lawyer.
Jim, could you turn the sound on?
We're taking each day as it comes. But I think that I can look you in the eye and tell you, you have some elected leaders at all levels of government that know the danger that is present and love our democracy and are prepared to do what we have to do. I think that's as far as I should go in this kind of setting.
Thank you, Debbie Dingell. Debbie, want your Coke? She never stops fighting for us and for our Constitution. And I heard your emotion over there. Thank you for that question, because it's really emotional time. Sam, come on up. I want to mention, first of all, I want to say thank you to the county. Thank you to Gregory Dill. Are you still here? The county administrator, he's coming back. Gregory Dill and the county administration. Derek Jackson is here. He's the chief of DEI initiatives for the county. Derek, you want to stand up? Say hi. Thank you. And Derek is here and will answer questions, I'm sure, right, Derek? I don't mean to throw you under the bus, but we really have an amazing county administration. I want to say that we were the organizers of the event out here were shocked when the signups were rolling in, and we passed 1,000, we passed 1,500. We're like, oh, geez. And the county just stepped right up and said, how can we help? We need to help. The sheriff is totally supportive. And I will say that I am just so thankful that we have a county administration and sheriff that we feel safe with, protected by. They are really, really, we are proud of them. So yay us. I also just want to mention Michigan Resistance. Ginger, stand up real quick. Debbie was talking, and we've all been talking about, like, talk to your Republican, talk to your friends who have Republican reps and get them to pressure their Republican reps. Ginger is the leader of Michigan Resistance, and that's what they do. So I want you to sign up with Michigan Resistance, and they'll tell you every week what the message is to people who have Republican legislators. Facebook, Michigan Resistance. And if you didn't get that, you can write to info@washtenaw.dems.org and we'll tell you. All right. We have fantastic allies, including Michigan Resistance and also the all of the Indivisibles. The Indivisibles, hats off. Indivisibles and Move On are doing incredible work. I know a lot of us are frustrated with what the Dems are not doing. But we are strong allies with some fantastic organizations. So, all right, it's my pleasure to welcome, finally, sorry we're late, Sam Bagenstos, who is a professor of law at the University of Michigan and was the general counsel for the Department of Health and Human Services under President Joe Biden.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry Sorry, you had a little bit of preview of me earlier. I was not expecting that, but I would say I'm really happy to be here. I'm always happy to be with folks from Washtenaw County Democratic Party, which is just such an amazing organization, really doing the work to make our democracy real. I'm not very happy to be talking about the things I'm talking about, I will say. So what I was asked to talk about today is Trump's attacks on the civil service and what the responses to that are. Just as a framing, we are right now seeing the greatest attack on the basics of our constitutional democracy in my lifetime and, for decades before that. And I'm 55 years old, and I really mean that. The basic democratic constitutional principle that Congress decides what the laws are, and when they are passed with the president's signature, the president has the duty to faithfully execute those laws, right? That is under challenge in a way that it simply has not been, in forever. And so what I'm going to talk about is a piece of that. And I think people do then jump to the question of, if these are violations of the law, why aren't people going to court? People are going to court, but I want to talk a little bit about what the courts are doing and why the courts are going to be insufficient to solve this problem. And then, hopefully have a little bit of time to take questions. And I often speak without notes. So much is going on that I thought I would forget stuff if I didn't write down at least a few notes. So just focusing on the attacks on the civil service. We know that Donald Trump has been focused since his return to office on attacking those institutions that might provide some independent views inconsistent with his, that might provide some locus of not simply cooperating with his will, but potential explaining to the world and pushing back on what he is trying to do. We've seen that in attacks on universities. We've seen that in attacks on law firms. And the attack on the civil service and the attack on labor organizations, on unions for civil service members, is part and parcel of the same thing. And from day one in office, we saw Donald Trump attacking the civil service. On day one, he issued an executive order creating what he now calls Schedule PC, that used to be called Schedule F in his original administration, taking an enormous swath of career civil servants who have protection or had protection against being fired without cause, and removing those for-cause protections that they had, by moving them into this new category of civil servants who no longer have the protections that civil servants have had in this country really since the adoption of the Pendleton Act in the late 19th century. A week later, Elon Musk and Doge had sent to all civil servants in the federal government this so-called fork in the road email saying, look, guys, if you want to stay here and work with us, great, but you might get fired. So why don't you take this option of, we'll put you on administrative leave and continue to pay you until September, and then you agree to quit. And when not enough people took the fork in the road of agreeing to quit, the administration began a series of mass firings. So first, mass firings of probationary employees. And to be clear, probationary employees aren't people who've done anything wrong. It's not that they've been put on probation. It just means they haven't been in their current jobs for long enough to get the same civil service protections that other employees get. And so these are people who, depending on the job, had been in their job for less than a year or less than 2 years. Often they'd been in other jobs in the government before then. So it's not even like they've only been in government service for less than a year or less than 2 years. Taking advantage of that, the Trump administration fired tens of thousands, over 100,000 probationary employees. Why? Just because they could. I mean, as simple as that. That wasn't enough, though. We've also seen the Trump administration simply shutting down or very close to shutting down entire agencies that were created by Congress without any statutory authority to do so. So we've seen them, you know, as Elon Musk said on what do they call Twitter now, X, on X, they put USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, through the wood chipper and have eliminated that agency, basically. You see the attempt to shut down the Department of Education and either get rid of its functions or send those functions to other agencies. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau instructing everybody who works there not to do any work anymore. U.S. Institute for Peace, various other agencies they've just shut down. The Voice of America, the agency that operates Voice of America, same thing. And all of these people who work in these agencies, or nearly all of these people who work in these agencies, depending, have been laid off because the administration says they have no more work to do. Well, of course they have no more work to do because they've been told not to do any work. That wasn't enough, so the president directed all agencies to come up with plans to lay off employees. We saw this past week at the Department of Health and Human Services, where I used to work, the implementation of this plan. So already 10,000 out of about 80,000 HHS employees had been driven out through the probationary firings, through the fork in the road, through just a lot of gratuitous meanness to people. And then this week, HHS sent termination notices to 10,000 more people, so losing a quarter of their staff over the course of about 2.5 months. And what does that mean? I mean, I just think this is really important. This can be very abstract, but I want to make it concrete. Well, this means eliminating the Administration for Community Living, which is the agency within HHS that until this week was the central place where services for people with disabilities were carried out and that advocated for disabled people in the United States, just eliminating that as an agency, even though Congress had just weeks before appropriated money to that agency. Taking the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which is the agency that, by the way, during the Biden administration finally made progress in reducing overdoses in this country. We finally saw that number go down. They're Debbie Dingell talked about the suicide hotline, the 988 suicide hotline around the country operated out of SAMHSA. They're eliminating that as a separate agency. They're cutting the staff in half or more, smushing it with another agency. The Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, which nobody knows about, but it is the research agency that ensures that the health treatments that we are providing are actually making a difference, that they're actually, something that's worthwhile and not quack treatments. Okay, well, so with this secretary, maybe we have an understanding why they're eliminating that agency, but they're eliminating that agency as well. They're eliminating entire offices at the National Institutes for Health, at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, offices involving HIV, many of them eliminated, minority health eliminated, workplace health, smoking prevention, maternal and child health services decimated through these layoffs. They eliminated all of the staff who administer the low-income heating assistance program. They didn't eliminate the program. There's actually still a bunch of money sitting there to give out, but they eliminated all the staff. There's been some pushback from the Hill on that. They might have rehired 1 or 2 people on the staff, but they eliminated all the staff from there. And this matters because it's not just the heating assistance program. They also provide cooling assistance. Right now is the time when the states that have tremendous heat problems in the summer are getting their assistance and beginning to figure out how they're going to provide it to people who need it in a world of intense global warming. I mean, we saw the hottest summer in history last year. We saw people dying because they couldn't get cooling, and this program is being shut down, not because Congress shut it down, but because this administration decided to shut it down. I mean, something, you know, so I just want to say this puts the lie to the statement that all they're doing is eliminating, you know, administrative services that are duplicative. That's what they said. We're eliminating back office services. You can't cut a quarter of the staff of a $1.8 trillion agency and think all you're doing is eliminating back office administrative services, and they're not. They've also fired very senior people within FDA who are involved in, you know, making sure that our drugs are safe, approving new drugs. They drove out the head of the Center for Biologics, who's the person in charge of vaccine approval. And he gave an interview to the Wall Street Journal yesterday where he said he was given the option of being fired or quitting, and he decided to quit after he was told to come up with evidence that vaccines cause autism. Now, you know, I think they said, well, you know, give us the evidence you have, as if they think that that evidence is there. But, you know, this is just, I mean, this is really substantive stuff, getting rid of programs people rely on through firing civil servants. Now, they also did fire some administrative people. So one sort of funny incident, if the whole thing weren't so sad, is they decided they were going to, you know, so the U.S. Public Health Service, which responds to public health crises around the country, has a commission corps, people who you may see them in uniform, they're Navy uniforms. And they decided they'd get rid of the administrative services. So they fired the people who do payroll for the commission corps. And then they realized there's no one to send out the paychecks for the people who are still there. So they had to hire one person back to send out the paychecks. So this is something I learned about. I, like many people who used to work in Washington, am on many Signal group chats. We don't have any, you know, journalists on our group chats. We don't do war plans, but we just talk about the damage that's being done. So enormous firings across the federal government. Also, a week ago, President Trump issued an executive order purporting to take away collective bargaining rights from civil servants in 18 departments, from 2/3 of the civil servants in the federal system. And what he said was, there's a statute that says, look, if there are people whose work is primarily engaged in national security, then the president can determine that they don't have collective bargaining rights. And so he just decided basically everything's national security now. So I will say 3 unions have immediately sued. There are lawsuits pending on that. But again, it's the sign that they are using these efforts not to save money, but to attack independent institutions that might stand as an obstacle to their unchecked exercise of power. Okay, so what is going on to stop this? Well, there is a lot of litigation challenging this. So Debbie Dingell said litigate. There's a lot of litigation challenging this. And challenging this on a bunch of grounds, and we're going to see more. So I talked about the litigation the unions have filed, challenging the deprivation of collective bargaining rights. That is pending. Interestingly, the Trump administration decided to try to jump the gun by filing their own lawsuit first against the unions. And of course, they sued in Texas because that's where they would sue. But there are 3 lawsuits pending on that. There are lawsuits pending challenging the mass firings, and some orders have been issued by judges saying you can't do the mass firings the way you did, but you might be able to do other kinds of firings. Those are on appeal. There are challenges to the decisions to get rid of agencies that Congress created and that Congress appropriated money to, whether on grounds that it's just arbitrary to do this, or on grounds that this is violating Congress's very fundamental power of the purse, the basic democratic principle that Congress decides what agencies we have and what to spend money on. But I will say this, it's very early days. The people who have challenged the Trump administration have won some important early victories in some of these cases. But as these cases go up the federal system, they go up to the US Supreme Court ultimately, right? And we know this is a Supreme Court that likes executive power, when Republicans are in office at least, that has delivered Donald Trump some very signal victories, including an incredibly broad immunity decision just last summer, including overturning the efforts to exclude him from the ballot based on the insurrection clause. So people, and including just yesterday, by the way, when Trump cut off teacher training funds to both state educational agencies and universities around the country, and a court issued an order stopping him from doing that, saying there's no legal basis for you to withhold these teacher training funds. The Supreme Court jumped in at a very early stage. This is an incredibly aggressive act. And just yesterday, by a 5-4 vote, with the 3 Democratic appointees and John Roberts dissenting, said, oh no, we're going to grant a stay of the district court's order, of the order requiring the teacher training funds to be provided, and let Trump withhold those teacher training funds. That means that states and universities are laying off folks who train teachers. That means teachers aren't getting the training. And that's, we'll see. I think there will be some victories in this litigation, but in all the cases challenging this. But it gives you a sense that if we're waiting on the courts to solve this problem, that's not going to work. The courts are important. The courts need to be there. The courts need to have the fortitude to defend the rule of law here. That's what the courts are there for, to defend the rule of law. They're not there to engage in the political debate, but they can create space by enforcing the law. But it's up to everybody in this room and everybody you're talking to take advantage of the opportunity created by this litigation to shine a light on the real harms that are being caused here. When people are losing their heating and cooling assistance, when Head Start programs are unable to pay their bills, when people who are relying on disability services aren't able to get them, right? That's a direct result of decisions that this administration is making that violate the law. And it's only by making that point more broadly so that the world sees what's going on, so that they understand that this is not just saving some money. By the way, even the administration says that their firing of all these people at HHS saves $1.8 billion. That's what they say. I don't believe that for a second. But even if that's true, I just said what the budget of HHS is. $1.8 trillion. So even if you take everything they say is at face value, what they just saved with all of this carnage is 0.1% of the budget of HHS, at the expense of maternal and child health, of vaccines, of HIV prevention, of all of this stuff. And people need to be making that point about what's going on. Okay, so I know we have many other panels. I think we might have time for like 1 or 2 questions, and then we can move on to the other panels. 1 question, it looks like.
Did Debbie Dingell cut into your time?
Debbie Dingell can cut into my time anytime.
Who's got a question? Got a question. Anybody? Okay, here. Yeah.
Right there. All right.
Pressure's on.
This is something I've been wondering about because I guess the unitary executive theory or whatever has been this like pet theory of the conservative legal movement for decades now, and they're really sort of bringing it to fruition here. And I guess I was wondering, is it possible in the future, if we want to like insulate agencies from this kind of stuff, is it possible to house agencies within the legislative branch, like within Congress instead of the executive branch as a way of insulating them? Or are there other ways to insulate agencies from these kinds of attacks from the executive?
Well, so, this is in the New Deal. That was the effort, one of the significant efforts that actually FDR and the people supporting FDR made. And that's one of the aspects of the New Deal that this current Supreme Court is trying to tear down. And so there's a whole other set of cases going on right now where the Trump administration is pushing to the Supreme Court cases that will get this court, and I actually fully expect this court to say, no such thing as an independent agency, certainly not a legislative branch agency that does anything other than gather information. All of this has to be under the control of the president. That's what they're pushing for right now. And honestly, that's not just a Trump thing. That has been a goal of the Republican Party and their appointees since the Reagan administration. And John Roberts, when he was a young lawyer in the Reagan administration, was very much a part of that. So, I think that's a conversation that we should be having with the public. But in the courts, I think in the short term, the prospects are dim. So, all right, I brought you a lot of light and happiness. Hopefully Jeff Irwin, when he talks about actually, helping people learn to read, will bring us a lot more light and happiness. So thank you.
Jeff Irwin to talk with us about new work at the state legislative level to support kids with dyslexia.
Thank you, Theresa. Good morning, Washtenaw Democrats. Great to see you all. My name is Jeff Irwin. I'm the state senator for the 15th district. So that means I represent people, the whole Ypsilanti area, the southern half of Ann Arbor, down to Milan and Saline, including all the way down to Tecumseh and Clinton and Manchester. So I have the pleasure of representing those folks in the state legislature. And I have the pleasure of being here with you this morning. And I want to thank you for being here because we just heard a lot of frustrating information. I want to take just a little bit of time to say I share that frustration. In a minute, I'm going to talk about things that we're trying to do at the state level to improve things in Lansing, which I think is important. But I do want to take just a second to say I am appalled by the reckless, illegal, and dangerous things that are happening in our federal government. And I'm really happy to see you here this morning because as much as all of us are frustrated with various things that the Democratic Party has or has not done over the years, and many of those criticisms are absolutely righteous, certainly I think I have some, the Democratic Party is one of the most important and powerful institutions that we have to fight back against this autocratic takeover of our democracy. And I'm hoping that, we can look forward to future free and fair elections. I'm a little worried about that, concerning the fact that we just elected a president who literally tried to overturn the last election he lost. So I'm very concerned. I don't want to just gloss over that, but I want to say that as much as I think all of us are frustrated with what happened in the last election, the folks who are here in this room, a lot of you are ones who did a ton of work to try to prevent that, to try to make this world better, and we're going to continue doing that work together, and I want to thank you. Okay, so in addition to everything that's happening in DC, there's a lot happening in Lansing as well. I know many times I've come before this group and said, hey, you need to pay attention to what your local officials are doing, what your state officials are doing, and there are a lot of reasons for that. But one reason, not just because the work we do is incredibly important to the future of our state, but one reason is because during these moments when everything is happening at the federal level that is frustrating, one of the things we have to do as Democrats also is present a positive message about what we're about, what we're trying to accomplish, what can happen if we elect Democrats. And I think that, frankly, I'll take a little bit of blame for this. I think we've done a really suboptimal job of messaging some of the great things we got done over the last 2 years. And you've all probably heard, the list of, lowering taxes for seniors and expanding the EITC for low-income workers and fully inclusive LGBT protections under our civil rights law and, protections for labor, improving the unemployment system for workers by making it easier and improving the sufficiency of the benefit. Lots of great things got done. And we need to remember to always know that when we elect Democrats, those are the kind of things that can happen. Thank you. One of the other things that happened though last year was we were finally able to pass legislation that I've been working on for a long, long time. So let me take you way back to 2016 when I served in the state house. When I served in the state house, the Republicans were in control. Governor Snyder was the governor. And at the time, just like today, there was a lot of frustration about why is it that we're not doing a better job teaching kids to read? We know that reading is a fundamental skill. We know that literacy is possibly the single most important thing to the future prosperity of the young people who are going through our schools. So why is it that our reading scores aren't what we'd like them to be? And without going into the rabbit hole of scores and who gets tested and who doesn't, and is it really comparable with other countries and all that, regardless of all that, the truth is that we can do a better job teaching our kids to read. And we particularly have big problems with kids that are in communities of color with their numbers. They're embarrassing. And so a lot of folks around the state have been talking about this issue for a long time. And in 2016, the Republicans came up with what they thought was a solution. I thought it was not a solution. I thought it was a stinker because, as usual, they don't want to invest in the problem. Instead, what they did is they passed this thing called the Read by Grade 3 law. And this law said we were going to test kids on their reading skills 3 times a year, kindergarten through 3rd grade. And if they couldn't pass the 3rd grade reading test, they would be automatically retained. Everybody said this wouldn't work. Everybody said that's not the right way to make retention decisions. It's much more complicated than that. Let's allow the nuance to exist. But anyway, they passed it. But during the debate of that legislation, I started getting interested in this issue of literacy and tried to learn more about what we could do. And I got outreach from a particular constituent who reached out to me and said, hey, look, I've got a problem with my child. My child's in AAPS. My child was struggling to read. I thought that maybe my child was dyslexic. I tried to work with the school district to get the school district to recognize this, to give this kid, the additional support that they need and could benefit from. And it was, according to my constituent, this was a titanic battle with AAPS. And she explained to me how she had to go hire private tutors, hire a private psychologist to get a diagnosis, and only then would the school district provide the type of additional help that her child needed. And her message to me was, what about all those kids out there who don't have a mom like me, who has resources and time, and who's willing to fight with the school district? And she pointed out that there are thousands of kids who are falling through the cracks because they either are dyslexic or maybe they just have characteristics of dyslexia. They have, maybe a mild form. Maybe they just haven't gotten the phonics instruction that they need at the time when they needed it. And so what I did is I started looking into the research. What I think I learned is that we were really missing this huge cohort of kids. Now, when I found out that, according to the research, 1 in 5 kids experiences characteristics of dyslexia. Now, not all these kids are going to get diagnosed because, like I said, there's a spectrum of effect. And so what I think is happening is that there's this huge cohort of kids who are not grasping the decoding skills that they need to read in the early grades. And so therefore they are not on track. And then in 4th grade and in 5th grade, when the demands on their vocabulary and the demands on their reading skills start to balloon, they just can't keep up. And I think that's one of the big reasons why when you look at the reading scores in Michigan, you'll see there's this huge drop off in 4th grade and 5th grade. The other thing that I think I realized was that part of the problem was our assessments. Our assessments were measuring comprehension. They weren't measuring these foundational skills. And we've got a ton of kids who are smart and they can memorize 1,000 Dick and Jane words. And they can answer a set of questions on a standardized test about what does this paragraph say, even though they're not really reading it, because they're composing it with sight words and they can answer comprehension questions. But when you ask them questions about how are you sounding out words, how are you forming these sounds, they struggle. And I think it's those kids who we're allowing to fall through the cracks, and those are the kids who, when vocabulary demands start to mount in 4th and 5th grade, are falling off. So what did we do? I left the legislature at the end of 2016. I was term limited out because of our mandatory inexperience laws in the state legislature. And But then I had an opportunity to run 2 years later for state senate, and I was fortunate enough to get elected. Thank you to the public for allowing me the opportunity to serve. And when I got back to Lansing in 2019, I started working on this right away because I knew that this was important. I knew it was big, and I also knew it was something that was, not a partisan priority, right? This was something that at the time the Republicans controlled the Senate, the Republicans controlled the House. We had a Democratic governor. I thought this is something that's really at the nexus of very important, very big, and also possible. So I started working on it, and in 2019, we put together legislation. We ended up actually passing it in the Michigan Senate with a big majority, and then it died over in the Michigan House. So then when Democrats took the first trifecta in state government since 1983, I got back to work on this, and we reintroduced the legislation. We got it reintroduced in 2023. We were able to pass it out of the Senate with huge majorities, and then it went over to the House. And if everybody knows what happened in the House last year, you'll know what I mean when I say that I am so grateful to the Speaker, and I'm so glad that me and my team and other supporters of this legislation were able to motivate the House to act on that before the election. We did not want to get wrapped up in the morass of lame duck, and we were very, very fortunate that it did not. It was passed through the House with a huge majority in September of 2024, and the governor quickly signed it, and now it's law. And so let me tell you what it does. What the law does is it weaves the science of reading into our early education literacy programs by weaving it into our assessments, our interventions, and our teacher training. Now, let me go through each of those just a little bit. I talked a little bit already about the assessments. We're already paying for and putting a lot of time into assessments in schools. And one of the things that this bill does is it says, okay, with those tests we're already paying for and we're already assigning time for, let's carve out some space to specifically measure phonics and decoding skills. And let's use that information to try to identify this large cohort of kids who are falling through the cracks and make sure they get the interventions that will work for them, evidence-based interventions. So that's what the assessment piece is. And the assessment piece, though, is what's happening right now is that all this legislation phases in over the next 2 years. So what's happening right now is the Michigan Department of Education is reviewing the current approved assessments, and they are going to approve a new list of approved assessments that comply with all the requirements of the Read by Grade 3 law, all the skills of literacy that was requiring the state to measure for, and it's going to add in these science of reading requirements around, phonemic awareness and decoding skills. So that's going to take about a year for MDE to get that new list, and then the schools are going to have to use assessments from that list. The intervention piece is that when the kids are shown to perhaps have characteristics of dyslexia, then the classroom teacher is to work with them using a multi-tiered system, starting with large group work, small group work, and then individualized work to try to bring that student up to the level where they think they should be. Of course, there's a point at which some of these kids might end up moving into an IEP or a special ed type environment, but the states that have already done this before Michigan have actually shown that this makes a meaningful reduction in your special ed roles, because what actually happens is a lot of these kids who end up going into needing an IEP, if they got the help they needed in first grade or second grade, that could be prevented. So that's what I'm hoping happens with this, is that we actually reduce the need for that with this. So those are the assessments, there's the interventions, and then the other piece, which is kind of quietly the most important piece, is the teacher training piece. We already started investing in this a couple years ago, because this was something that I was working with my Republican colleagues on, and because they controlled the budget a few years ago, we were able to get the state to start investing in teacher training around science of reading informed training a few years ago. And so the state's been putting millions of dollars into letters training every year for the last few years, getting more and more and more of our teachers educated. And so that's going to continue to roll forward, because what the law requires is that the science of reading methodology be a part of the teacher certification programs at our universities, but also that in the regular district provided professional development that teachers have to go through, the continuing education that teachers have to do, that this is folded in, so that eventually we can get all the new teachers up to speed, and we can bring in old teachers and expose them to methods that they may or may not have been exposed to, depending upon exactly when they got their certification. So once again, weaving the science of reading into the assessments, the interventions, and the training. So you know, this is all phasing in. I'm really hopeful that this can make a big difference for literacy rates, but even more importantly for the outcomes of our young people who are in school right now and need to read. And it's really great to be able to, you know, come here even on a day when we're focusing so much on, you know, all the frustrating things that are happening at the federal government. It's great to try to breathe some life into the idea that when you elect people who care, people who want the government to work, people who believe that we can do great things as a community, then we can. And this was one of the great things I think we've done. We're going to be monitoring it over the next couple of years to make sure that the progress we think we made is realized, and to make sure that the path that we're on is followed faithfully. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about it, and I don't know if we have time for questions or not, but I'll take some. One question. All right, I'll let Thomas. For time purposes.
Hello. I wanted to ask a question actually about special education. One of my close friends asked me to ask this question on her behalf because she couldn't be here. So with the recent Supreme Court ruling allowing the federal government to cut off education funding, my friend works as a social worker in education, and she wanted to know, is there a plan to protect, I wrote this down, special education funding and student services funded by Title I and other grants, which are programs for schools with low-income students?
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. So I think that the most straightforward answer that I can give to that is that no, there is not a plan yet. But there is a lot of conversation happening about this. Just, was it 2 weeks ago now? Maybe actually 3 weeks ago now, I think. We had a hearing in the Senate Appropriations Committee where we brought the state superintendent, the superintendent of the state school board in to talk about what these federal cuts might look like and what they might mean, talk about sort of the volume of them, and to help do what I guess we're asking all of you to do, which is to communicate to the public about how grave this concern is. Because when you look at the state education budget, there is a whole lot of federal money in there. I mean, you heard the Congresswoman Dingell say that the state budget generally is about 42% federal money. The school aid budget, you know, we're counting on about $3 billion out of 20 from the feds. And so if those dollars don't come in, then we're going to have to reckon with that. And the choices that the state has are to try to backfill those dollars for special ed or for Title I, which are the two biggest things, or not, or to do something in the middle. I think that one of the struggles we have at the state level right now is we're also looking at potential cuts to Medicaid, which are so large that they could overwhelm the entire state budget. And then finally, what the other thing is that we've got our Republican colleagues and the governor who are pushing really hard for a roads plan, which I don't really believe it's necessarily going to fix our roads, but if we get a roads plan, that's going to eat up a whole lot of money that could have otherwise been used to care for struggling seniors or fill the holes in Title I. So we don't really have a plan yet, but it's a big topic of conversation in Lansing. Everybody's identifying sort of the magnitude of the federal dollars and what are the most important holes to plug as we move along the budget process. What's probably going to happen with the budget process this year is that the Senate is likely to pass a budget probably, I would guess, sometime in May, right after the consensus revenue estimating conference. And the House has already said, the House Speaker has already said, I want to hold this budget up and delay it until September, because the state's fiscal year goes from October 1 to October 1. So the House has already said, we intend on being irresponsible and playing brinksmanship with this negotiation. And we're right now just kind of trying to reckon with what are the magnitude of these things and what's really going to happen. You know, what's really going to happen with these federal cuts. And I don't think anybody knows yet. And that's one of the things that makes it hard to have a really solid plan. I will take 1 second, though, to say my prediction, which is I think the Republicans are going to cut these programs dramatically, but they're going to cut them in a way where the cuts happen after the next midterms so they can try to avoid the political consequences of doing what they're doing, but still spend the money today that they're cutting 2 years from now. If I were, you know, horrible, that's what I would do. So thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Testing.
I'm temporarily acting as Theresa. If Beth and Jimmie can head up here. If you have a gray Honda, with It's a Coup on your vehicle. We need your vehicle moved. The last part of the license plate is A68. Anybody in here? Must be someone not in this room. Okay. And then immediately after the program ends, you have to move your cars. So hopefully we'll stay on time, but they have to all be moved by 12:15. And then now Evan Mylan's going to moderate the panel.
All right. First and foremost, thank you, Beth Gibbons, who is the director of the Resiliency Office of Washtenaw County, State Senator Jeff Irwin from the 15th District, and Representative Jimmie Wilson Jr. from the 32nd District for speaking about the climate crisis in Washtenaw County with us today. First and foremost, how many of you have questions in mind that you want to ask the panelists? Okay. That means I'm going to ask most of the questions. So I'm going to give each individual about 5 minutes to introduce themselves and say, opening remarks. Then I will ask 2 to 3 questions, give about 2 or 3 minutes for answers. We will go in rotation. We will start with Beth and then Jeff, I'm sorry, and then, or Jimmie, I'm sorry, Representative Wilson and then Senator Irwin. We'll just go through the rotation in that way. And then if questions do come to mind, raise your hand and we'll have those answered. And then we will have 2 minutes at the end for concluding remarks. And so with that, Beth, would you like to introduce yourself?
It's on. Oh, it is so on. Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Gibbons. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the director of the Resiliency Office for Washtenaw County. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit about what our office is doing, and a little bit about why, amidst everything else that is happening in our country and in our world, thinking about the climate crisis is something I'd still like to have you keep in your mind and in your heart. So just a little bit of my background. I mean, it was interesting to hear the remarks earlier today because I had my first internship in DC in the Voice of America, with Voice of America. Voice of America actually shares a building with Department of Health and Human Services. So spent my college years really close to a lot of people who have lost a lot in the last couple of weeks. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa. And then I moved into my climate career working for NOAA. I was the director of the Great Lakes Climate Adaptation Partnership, which is dedicated to making climate information usable and useful to end users across the Great Lakes region. I most recently served on the Federal Advisory Council for Climate Adaptation before that council was summarily dismissed a couple of weeks ago. And my husband is a nurse at the VA here. And it's really been an honor for me to be able to come into this role with the county. I began in my position in September to be able to bring work that I've done nationally and regionally, but now to actually serve the county and to get to be in this position where I'm thinking about how do you tend the garden you can touch, and to be in the county, for there to be a resiliency office and to get to direct it, I really am grateful for. So the Resiliency Office is working on the implementation of what's called the Resilient Washtenaw Plan. This was approved by the Board of Commissioners in 2022, and it pursues 2 really ambitious climate targets, one of which is having carbon neutrality for county operations by 2030, and for the county as a whole being carbon neutral by 2035. In addition to those 2 ambitious kind of high-level goals, it also has 8 other strategy areas, which include health, natural resources, infrastructure, kind of down the line. In addition to the strategies, it also is really underwritten by key principles of communication, transparency, racial justice, health in all things. And so as we think about the implementation of the Resilient Washtenaw Plan, while we are pursuing these 2 big ambitious climate targets of decarbonization, we're also thinking about individual actions, which really speak to not just how climate will impact us in the, how we reduce our carbon emissions, but how climate change impacts us today and how it's going to impact us in the future. And so real briefly, some things that we see already going on throughout the county. And I would say when I began with the county in September, my role was to begin to coordinate us towards reaching those climate targets, but it wasn't that there was nothing already underway. The county really has been in a leading position thinking about climate change and taking action up until now. Our facilities department is actively working on decarbonizing its facilities. This building is going to have solar panels put on it this year. By the end of this year, this will be 98% energy generated from solar on the building. We're going to be putting solar on 7 other buildings across the county. We're going to have a full megawatt of solar being produced on county buildings. Our Parks Department has adopted an ambitious climate plan that is both reducing climate impacts in the parks, but also really working to account for how do our natural systems and spaces give people places to be that are safe, refreshing, helping health, like their mental health and physical health, and also how do they contribute to reducing our carbon emissions. Our health department is actively working together with the Water Resources Commission, looking at areas that are impacted by flooding. If you don't know, then now you're gonna know. Since 1950, we've seen a 45% increase in precipitation, that's rain falling in our area. So when we see more floods in West Willow, when we see more floods across Ypsilanti, when we see more floods around Allen Creek in Ann Arbor, that's because we have 45% more rain than we did just 50 years ago when a lot of this infrastructure was put in place. So we're actively working on addressing those risks. Let's see, where do I want to go from here? Aside from the work that we know is so important for us to just be not only kind of following where Ann Arbor's work has been, but making sure the county is positioning itself for leadership. We've seen $27 billion disasters in 2024. And we know that our own communities are some of those with the most repeat loss in the country. So being prepared for and responding to climate impacts isn't just about our carbon, it's about actually keeping communities safe today.
Thank you, Beth. Representative Wilson.
Testing. Hey, there we go. Good morning. Yeah, still morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jimmie Wilson, State Representative for House District 32 that covers Ypsilanti City, Ypsilanti Township, and parts of Superior and Pittsfield Township. This morning, I'm glad to be on this panel with definitely 2 experts, but all things environmental. And born and raised in Ypsilanti, I come from a community that has kind of a typical urban core story in regards to environmental issues, where we had a lot of manufacturing jobs, a lot of manufacturing facilities, and then when those jobs left, we not only lost good paying jobs and tax base, but they also left a lot of pollution behind as well. And so in an area that has 35 to 40% African-American population, probably almost 50% minority at this point, it's very troubling, and we have a lot of work to do. Fortunately, we have a lot of good local partners, and there's been some good funding that's come from the state level to try to assist a little bit, but we still have a long way to go. And so in my first term as a state representative, co-sponsored legislation around civil fines and criminal penalties about unlawful dumping. That actually was signed into law. It's PA 6 now of 2024. Co-sponsored legislation around PFAS bans, of course, and trying to identify, make sure we have our packaging that's identified as PFAS. Definitely a big supporter of community solar and increasing the solar caps. I was one of the main sponsors in the House for the water affordability package. And also, we did pass the Filter First legislation that's in schools and child care centers, where we try to get water filters in all those facilities. I think one of the biggest pieces of legislation that we did get passed was the Clean Energy and Jobs Act that requires utilities to generate about 60% of their energy, renewable energy by 2035, and by 2040, making sure Michigan is a leader by having 100% renewable energy by 2040. It also increases rooftop solar access, requires energy companies to have energy storage. And I think that that was probably the biggest piece of legislation, but there's a plethora of other things that we could have done. But it comes with the challenges of having 110 state representatives and 38 senators and trying to get everyone on board and a governor as well. And so a big fan of legislation that our State Senator Jeff Irwin as well as our State Rep Jason Morgan have sponsored, which is the polluter pay legislation. Jeff may go into depth on that one. But simply put, we should be, if someone pollutes, they should pay, right? And so, I mean, that polls at like 90% here in Michigan. I'd really like to know who the 10% are that don't believe in that. I'm assuming those are the people that maybe work for those companies, but I mean, that's just a no-brainer that should have gotten done. But we're going to always continue to work hard at trying to convince our colleagues that this is common sense environmental policy. So thank you for having me this morning.
Thank you, Representative Wilson. Senator Irwin.
Thank you, and good morning again, everyone. Jeff Irwin. Before I was a state legislator, and even before I was a county commissioner, my first job when I was still in college and coming out of college was working with the League of Conservation Voters, and my mission was to try to connect the real issues caused by pollution and climate change to voters, and to try to elect a pro-environment Congress. Then eventually, I was able to move over and become the director of the Michigan League of Conservation Voters, which has grown tremendously under the leadership of Lisa Washtenaw after I left. But we were really trying to do the same thing at the state level. Let's elect state level leaders who care about clean water and clean air and a future climate that people can enjoy. And so that's all something that's always been a passion of mine. And I'm probably not going to talk as much about some of the pollution control pieces because we've only got so much time. But one of the things that is a really nice benefit in my view with respect to climate action is how there's a spillover effect in terms of reducing pollution. When I think about coal power plants, I don't just think about how stupid it is for us to take our energy waste and throw it into the atmosphere in tiny little particles where we can never collect it. And not only is that dumb, but all those tiny particles affect people's health. They give kids asthma. That those heavy metals drop into our Great Lakes, and that's why we have fish advisories on all our fish. And so I always try to be someone who says, let's put the value of all that fish and all those kids' lungs and of our bodies on the balance sheet when we talk about the cost of controlling pollution. So I'm not going to talk a ton about pollution, but I can tell you, I hate cancer. I don't want kids to get asthma, and we need to do better with pollution. Having said that, the climate focus is, and I'm glad that Representative Wilson talked about this, is something that's been really important to this legislature. But of course, when we had that first Dem trifecta in 40 years, we had a 1-vote majority in both the House and Senate. So I want to be straight with you in saying that we didn't make every success I think we should have, but we did pass some really important legislation, and the representative mentioned it. This clean energy legislation we passed last fall sets a strong clean energy standard, sets strong standards for renewable energy, increases our standards for energy optimization. So in other words, energy efficiency, which is actually super wonderful. I mean, we don't talk about this enough, but the cheapest, cleanest energy is the energy you never use. And there are opportunities to put people to work improving facilities that save more money than the project cost. I mean, we should be doing this every single time we have an opportunity. But we advanced that. And we also made some changes to how siting works for large-scale solar operations. And that was another part of this that was rather controversial. But we passed all of those pieces to enable a greater penetration of renewable and clean energy in Michigan. We also improved the cap on distributed generation. Representative Wilson mentioned this a little bit as well, but up until last year, Michigan had a 1% cap, and the utilities could refuse to let you tap into the system if you had solar on your roof once they reached that 1% cap, and DTE was right at that cap. We extended that cap to 10% with an escalator. So that provides a lot of room for people to be able to invest in clean energy and climate safe solutions without being shut out by the utilities. So that was, I think a really important part. I already talked a little bit about the optimization piece, but one other piece about the energy efficiency that we've been making progress on, I hope we continue to, is around weatherization. One of the big problems is that when we heard the talk about the federal money earlier through LIHEAP, there is federal money that's available to help weatherize the homes of low-income people, but often what happens is when our folks at the county go in there to look at the home, they might have a leaky roof. Well, if you have a leaky roof, the federal government doesn't allow you to spend money on insulation in a house with a leaky roof wisely. So one of the problems has been, well, if we could fix the roof, then we could also lower their energy bills and make this weatherization money be much more effective. So what the state is now starting to provide is what we call bridge funding or gap funding to make sure that, you know, when we find these situations where someone could make use of federal resources, but they're barred from doing so because of some condition in their home, let's take some state resources, put them into there to make sure we can unlock as much as we can of the federal money. The final big pillar of climate action, in my opinion, clean energy, optimization, and adaptation. We'll talk more about that later because I'm running out of time, but this is a really important part as well, because the sad truth is that, you know, when I started my career in environmental action 25 years ago, we were trying to bend the curve and stop climate change. I can't even talk about that anymore with a straight face. The ship is largely sailed, and one of the things we have to make a more important part of our set of priorities is adaptation, and how do we deal with this additional volume of water, and how do we address the real changes that are happening to our ag industry and elsewhere in this environment we now unfortunately live in.
Thank you, Senator Irwin. We will move into questions now. So the first question will be, the electrical grid continues to be overstressed as the climate crisis intensifies. Blackouts have become more common and longer lasting. What steps are you taking to mitigate long-term blackouts in times of extreme weather events? We will begin with Representative Wilson.
Thank you for that. We got to hold our utility companies accountable, honestly. And there has been legislation introduced to try to not allow our utility companies to be so involved in politics. I mean, money in politics is a typical story we always hear, but I mean, it's real. And we got to get more accountability out of our DTE and consumers. And I mean, especially DTE, they're terrible. But consumers is only like this much better, I mean, honestly. So we have to hold them accountable. And there's legislation that I've co-sponsored in regards to public power, just in general, of all the utilities. Obviously, that's way down the line, longer fetched, but generally speaking, we need to promote that more, especially for our local municipalities. As you know, we have one here in Washtenaw County. I'm really hoping that it gets all the way to the finish line, and but we need more of that, because we see that around the state, those municipalities that have their own power control, their reliability is a whole lot better, and so we have to get to that level.
Senator Irwin?
Yeah, I just will back up what Representative Wilson said. There is legislation out there to ban contributions from publicly regulated utilities, which I actually think makes sense. We ban contributions from other heavily regulated industries like casinos, given the fact that the public has guaranteed them a business and a profit and all of that. I think it makes sense that we not have them investing the way they do in the political process. But also there was legislation last term that would create penalties, like financial penalties for the utilities if they have an outage. And so I don't remember exactly what the scheme was, but essentially if you were out for 24 hours, they would have to pay you a certain credit on your bill. And then the next 24 hours it would go up. And then the 24 hours after that it would go up a lot. And then once they got to 5 days, it ended up being a significant amount of money, like several hundred per customer, which I think makes sense. I think it provides an incentive for them to fix their system and to harden the grid. I don't know about all of you, but you know, when my power goes out, I usually lose a lot of money in food, which gives me an opportunity to remind you all, if you know folks who are on SNAP assistance and they lose food because of an energy outage, make sure they contact my office. There is a way to get SNAP replacement dollars for those types of individuals and families. So a lot of people are losing a lot of money because of this, and we need to pass legislation like that I think holds them accountable. I do want to make one small additional pitch for public power, though. It seems sometimes far-fetched, but I would just ask you to think about a couple things. One, right now, I think every single person in this room probably, unless you're on a well, is on a publicly water system, right? And so I just think about it. If would you want DTE to control our water system? Absolutely not. That would be insane. And so I don't know why we don't think about electricity the same way. It's something that's necessary for everyone. It's a public good. It's a natural monopoly. It should be public controlled, just like our water. And even though it does seem like a far-fetched thing because we've all lived only in this kind of environment with privatized power. There are 44 communities in the state of Michigan that already have municipal power, and they have cheaper, cleaner, more reliable power on average than we do. And so, you know, everybody, I think there's a lot of concern if if the city of Ann Arbor were to move towards public power, because it would be very, very expensive, but it would not be nearly as expensive as what we're doing now, which is continuing to pay for a bad product and invest heavily in not just a poor set of distribution lines, but also the profit and the lobbying and the advertising and, you know, all the other things that DTE does that don't contribute to delivering us cheaper, cleaner, more reliable power.
Thank you. Beth Gibbons?
Finer point on how poorly we are served. According to the American Society of Civil Engineers, our energy infrastructure grade in Michigan is a D, and it takes 30% longer than the national average to restore power in Michigan. So what we experience is not normal, and it doesn't need to be accepted, and that's even among other IOUs and, you know, investor-owned utilities. From the perspective of the county, we're actively working on renewable energy projects. How do we help to extend the reach of solar, of geothermal? How do we work with municipalities so that they are able, so they're preparing land use ordinance and siting to bring in renewable energy projects. We're also actively talking with the city of Ann Arbor about a role for the county to extend what their program, their Solarize program, which is when we bring neighbors together to do bulk buys for solar. So getting solar on people's homes and getting them access to battery backup so that you have that kind of personal or perhaps neighborhood scale community resilience. And I know there's a question about actual spaces where people can gather, and so I can talk more about that as we go on, but I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much. All right, the next question. Weather events of the previous few years have exposed deficiency in warming and cooling centers in our communities. What steps are you taking to expand access to warming and cooling centers in times of extreme temperatures? And we will begin with Senator Irwin.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have as much copy on this one as I do on everything else, so maybe I'll save some time, but just by saying that it's very, very important if there are ways that the state can be more helpful to providing those resources to local units of government that are usually on the front lines of providing these kind of human service needs. I certainly am ready to do that, and yeah, it's certainly something we need to do more of, but it's not usually something that I'm personally involved in at the state legislative level.
Thank you, Senator Irwin. Beth Gibbons?
So we're actively working on these solutions, which are called resilience hubs. And I will say one of the difference between resilience hubs and cooling and warming centers is that they really orient towards making sure we have 72-hour battery backup, that there's access to, people can get access to refrigeration for medications, that they have access to electrical outlets for charging. And when resilience hubs are taken to their fullest extent, and this isn't always possible, that they're community-owned spaces. And so our work at the county right now is collaborating with community groups across the county to identify where there might already be resilience hubs, where people gather, where they expect to gather. During the time of emergency, people don't start doing something different. And so it's important to recognize where are people already ready to go and be comfortable, and how do we support those spaces. As a county organization, we are also really thinking about how do we take advantage of spaces like this one, like the LRC, that is going to have 98% of its power coming from solar on the building, to be a more sustained, recognized, and regularly available space in the time of emergency. The county recognizes that's an interest to the community. It's complicated to work through how do we actually make that available, to have staff here, to have resources here, etc. But it's actively under conversation of what is the way we use county assets also to be known, reliable, readily accessible spaces during the time of emergency. So we're thinking about both strengthening those community places and also using county-owned assets more effectively to support people during emergencies.
I think Beth just kind of highlighted where that's going to be more of a maybe a local government really taking the lead on that. But as our state senator said, any way that we can be of assistance at the legislative level, we'd of course be helpful. But I think that a lot of our local partners are doing a great job, and shout out to our county commissioner here, Annie Somerville, who's I know have been very concerned and hands-on with trying to make sure we have plenty of heating and cooling centers.
Thank you so much. We do have a question from the audience. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, I'm from Pennsylvania and New Jersey. I've been in the energy conservation field since Jimmy Carter's time. And this is for Ruth. I love all this stuff. Have you considered your staff launching a series of resilience workshops for Washtenaw County residents where you teach them about how to garden, how to build community gardens, how to adapt solar with what resources are available, and how to weatherize your home with what resources are available? I mean, every little bit helps, but resilience workshops might be a good series of workshops that Washtenaw County residents would get behind. Have you thought of that?
Yeah, so in our Resilient Washtenaw plan, we have these 8 strategies. The first strategy is called implementation, and number 1 of implementation is education and engagement. And we understand that without that, everything else falls apart. And that kind of sustained resilient workshop activity, definitely high on the list of things that we hope to be rolling out soon. Thanks.
All right, we do have a question online. It says, to permit the efficient use of more solar and wind energy sources, if I understand correctly, we need to upgrade high tension lines to permit transmission of energy from these sources long distances across the state and the county. Are we moving rapidly enough? Hang on, there we go. To upgrade the transmission grid, which federal, state, or private entities are most responsible for accomplishing this mission? Whoever wants to take it first can go ahead.
I mean, I think that the question was, are we doing enough? And I think the answer is clearly no. But there is a lot happening, and there is a lot of investment going into that need. I think that from what I can tell, the state strategy seems to be that we're relying upon those private solar developers to do a lot of that upgrade of the infrastructure. And that's one of the benefits that, I've really been trying to sell my colleagues on with respect to community solar, which has not been authorized yet in Michigan, but was also one of the benefits of the large scale solar siting bill that was passed in the end of 2023. Because what happens is when these large solar developers, whether it's DTE or consumers or some third party, when they build these, many 100-acre or maybe even sometimes 1,000-acre solar facilities, they're required to, as part of that, invest in some pretty significant grid upgrades. So I don't think we're doing enough, but I think that as we put more and more solar online, the MPSC in combination with the developers are requiring those investments in the transmission grid. Personally, one of the things I'm most focused on in this area, though, is trying to make sure that we have some of those small rooftop individual systems. We make those possible and economically viable, because right now the rules are unfair for the people who have excess energy off their roof. They don't get enough payback because the utilities have gamed the rules. And also getting things like community solar in areas so that, yes, as the question implies, it's important that we have these high voltage transmission lines to get power from far away to here without losing so much of it along the way. But it's also important, and maybe even, I guess, more important to me, I'm saying, to get more localized energy production happening. Even though per kilowatt hour, it's less efficient, so it doesn't look as good to the utility companies, for the actual homeowners or the actual business owners or the person who owns that farm field that has the solar on it, it's much better. And we also don't have these concerns with energy loss. It also makes our grid more resilient if we're not reliant on a few big generators, and instead we have a lot of little ones. And just finally, I'll say storage is an even more important part of this, because we need to get on-site storage in as many places as possible so that we're not so reliant on the grid.
Thank you so much. We do have 2 more or 3 more questions. Okay, let's start with you.
Hi, my name is Kathy Wyatt, and I want to thank all of our panelists. And I wanted to elevate the importance of the environmental justice movement, which recognizes that Black communities, brown communities, our communities of color, particularly our poor communities, are most often hit the hardest when we have natural disasters, are most often hit the hardest when we have by climate change. And that I know Jeff and Jimmie are very aware and active, and I know the county is. And I think it's important to recognize that when I was much younger, I I didn't get it around climate change and the environment. I thought of the environment our environmental movement as being something that rich, privileged white people were involved for so they could have more access to water, pools and beaches and forests and things that that Black people were not allowed to have access. There has always been a problem around access to water for Black communities, for poor, particularly Black communities, whether it was public pools, the beaches. So I think I want to express my appreciation for the work you all have done in this area. And I wanted to make sure that that issue of disparate access around in our communities are the ones, Black, brown, poor communities are the ones where the air there's been the most pollution and dumping, and the air has been so dirty. And this is one of the reasons Black children in poor communities have such a high rate of asthma. So I just wanted to make sure that we keep that in mind as we talk about climate change and environmental issues. Is like many areas, sometimes man-made disasters like President Trump is doing. Our communities of color, our poor communities are the ones where people are hurt the most. So I just wanted to state that. Thank you.
Well said. Just a quick response. I chair the budget for environment, Great Lakes, and energy. And one of the things we did for the last 2 years was we changed the boilerplate language in the budget, the language that sort of governs how the money is spent, to implement what was called a Justice 40 lens. So in pretty much every area where the state is spending money on drinking water, sewers, flood prevention, whatever, dam removal, all of that, there were elements added to say that the department shall and must consider certain things to make sure that communities of color, communities of low income are first in line for that money. And that's also been done with the way that the state revolving fund gets spent, which is the largest source of state money for water systems, which is incredibly important for water quality, drinking water quality. It's also really important to keep our bills down, which is key. And I'll just say a couple specific things that I'm focused on right now. Did anyone remember seeing a couple weeks ago what was happening in Southwest Detroit with the flooding down there? It was like remarkably bad, right? And we need to be more attentive to that. But we also have similar problems right here in Washtenaw County. So one of the things that we're working on right now is trying to get state money to help us remove the Beyer and Tyler dams. Beyer being a bit more of a priority for the kind of concerns that we're talking about, if I understand the water flows. And so that's the sort of thing that we're working on a tactical basis to align with what I said kind of at the strategic level about trying to make sure that communities are taken care of, and particularly communities that flood regularly and have a lot of low-income residents. That's especially important that we get state money to come in and help those communities, because a lot of times those folks maybe don't have as good of insurance. Even if they do have insurance, it's complicated and costly for them to make a claim. And a lot of times, I guess the way I would say it is just simply that it's so expensive to be poor. Right. And I just think that that's one of the reasons why we have to be more attentive to those needs.
Before I'll ask you questions, I just need to make an announcement. At 12 o'clock, there will be a test of the tornado siren. There's no tornado. We're fine. Go ahead.
Thank you for being here, all of you, to give us information about climate. I live in an area in Ann Arbor. If the wind blows hard, our outage, our lights go out. We all buy generators. So is it anything you can get DTE to help us pay for these generators that we are buying?
I mean, in theory, yes. Practically, no. Right. So there's a few different strategies that people have talked about. Like you could require them to pay for it. I don't think that's gonna happen practically from the political world we live in. There have been some folks who've said, well, what about some sort of tax credit or that kind of thing? Which I would be interested in talking about that. But I'm not really sure it's directly attuned to sort of meeting the needs of the kind of communities that Kathy Wyatt was just talking about. Right. So it's also, I think, a reason for us to lean a little bit more into this storage question. How can we make sure that people have batteries that can be maybe an even better way than a generator for them to meet those needs? So I don't live too far from you, and I know that every time the wind blows, I'm plugging in my phones and waiting for my neighbors' generators to go on. So it's a terrible problem. It's one of the things that's motivated, I think, a lot of us to say maybe there should be a public authority that's more attentive to our local needs.
I do want to say, just from a broader perspective, at this point, 37% of Americans either own or are considering purchasing a generator, and every one of those diesel generators running is putting us further in the hole in the climate consideration. So I think it's really time, when we look at who's investing in what we would call climate adaptation, we see a huge amount of investment from households and small farmers. We see a tremendous amount of investment from municipalities and governments. We see almost no investment, a pittance of investment from corporations. It is really time for them across the board to be paying their way rather than expecting governments and individuals to be paying for the impacts that they're putting out there. So that's, I mean, your experience is common, and we need to find a way for someone else to be paying for this.
And real quick, before we get to the next question, I've had power outages over the past year, numerous. A couple of years ago, there was a huge summer one. Jimmie knows. If you have a power outage every time, I recommend flooding the Michigan Public Service Commission with complaints. Okay.
Hi, okay. Hi, I wanted to ask about the community solar efforts you were talking about, and you were talking about giving solar, like helping people set up solar panels on their houses. But I rent, so I wouldn't be able to do that without permission from my landlord and such. Is there any effort, and I know a lot of people in Ann Arbor rent, like, is there any effort to like get the, to find a way to let people who rent participate in that? Like, I don't know if that would require negotiating with landlords or what it would look like, but are there any efforts to address that and make it so that these are programs are accessible to renters?
I mean, what I would say is I'd love to talk with you afterwards. I'm in the process now in the county of thinking about how do we scale up what's happening within the city of Ann Arbor, and I'd be happy to connect you with the information that you need as a renter, but it sounds like these guys are eager to have other answers to that too.
I mean, there is legislation to try to fix this problem. So last session, it was Senate Bill 151 and 152. It's been legislation called community solar that we've been working on for many, many years, but we're unfortunately very close, but did not get passed in the last session. It's interesting, though, it might be an issue that comes up during this session. It's always been a little bit bipartisan. So for instance, there are two bills in the Senate last year, 151 and 152. My counterpart was from the Western Upper Peninsula, a Republican. And so it's one of these issues that maybe we can get some movement on. But essentially the way community solar works is that a solar developer, whether that's DTE or, Corporation X that wants to build a solar array, could build one out in, Western Washtenaw or Pittsfield or somewhere, and then they could sell subscriptions to anyone, someone who was a renter, someone who wasn't a renter, to a church, and those subscriptions would entitle you to a portion of the energy generated from that site, and then that would be credited to your bill. So that's a way for renters or for people who live on particularly leafy streets who don't have good solar access to the sun because of the trees in their area, or maybe they just have really crappy silver maples like I do that fall all the time, right? There are technical reasons why people might want to invest in community solar rather than on their property, and it's especially important for renters. And it's also a great opportunity for some of our institutions that serve low-income people, because the way we've designed the legislation is that 30% of the subscribers have to meet that criteria. So that's what we're trying to pass, community solar, and we're going to reintroduce that here in the next probably month, but we're still figuring out exactly when the right sequence is.
Yeah, my question involves nuclear energy. As you guys know, probably Palisades is restarting in the state of Michigan. Hopefully, at least from my perspective, I like nuclear. But DTE has had an active permit for another Fermi reactor since 2015, south of Detroit. And obviously, a cleaner grid is cleaner energy. Would the state support DTE in actually utilizing that and constructing a new reactor to generate more power?
Well, I know that there's legislation currently that probably will move definitely in the House fairly soon around small nuclear reactors or small modular reactors, SMRs. So I think that kind of addresses what you're talking about, but and I don't really have a position yet on nuclear, because I think it's kind of an area that there's a lot of opinions on both sides on that, and so I'm still kind of learning more about it. But I know that in the House there's legislation that's bipartisan that may potentially increase how much nuclear we have here. But I think our state senator can speak a little more on that.
I have way too much to say on nuclear. We don't have time, but what I will say is that I have very complicated feelings about it. If you look at it from purely a climate perspective, yeah, it looks great because the emissions, it's no carbon emissions. But if you look at the whole life cycle of how that facility gets built and how the mining of all that, it's not as clean as it's sometimes built. But the other problem with nuclear that I have, and this is somebody who I'm not strongly against it, certainly not strongly for it. The biggest problem I have with nuclear is it's so darn expensive. So like right now, one of the biggest problems we have with Michigan is that our power is so expensive. And here we have this opportunity where solar is the cheapest type of new power to build. Solar, wind, and even though they have some issues, they're vastly cheaper. So here we have on the other end of the scale, nuclear, which has some advantages, but it's incredibly expensive. And the state government has already put $300 million of your cash money into subsidizing this company Holtec to reopen Palisades. If Palisades was a good deal, they wouldn't need $300 million from the taxpayers to make it happen. And so nuclear has some climate advantages, but it is incredibly expensive and it is incredibly lumpy. And I'm a big believer in trying to invest in a distributive, network that is going to therefore be more resilient and I think also cheaper in the end, and certainly better for the environment if we rely more on solar and storage.
All right, my apologies. I see there are other questions. We are running short on time, so I would like you all to have the opportunity to say your concluding remarks, and then we can continue this discussion next month. Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I'll just close with legislation that was signed into law, I think, at end of December, the Michigan Energy Assistance Program. If you know folks that are maybe on a lower income scale, there is more dollars available now for help with utility payments, specifically energy assistance. And so if you need more information, of course, reach out to me or Jeff's office on that. But I just wanted to highlight that if you know folks that are struggling to make utility payments, there is assistance for that.
I would just say thank you to WCDP for continuing to be an organization that is fighting against, an autocratic takeover of our democracy. Thank you for being here. If anybody wants to talk more about these critical issues around climate or environment, I'm very much interested in it. If you can't tell, this is something that I really geek out on, and so I'm happy to talk more about nuclear. I think that's a very interesting conversation. Nuclear was actually included in the definition for clean in Michigan's 100% clean energy law. So I think the state's policy going forward is going to be balanced in that regard. But there's a lot of nuance to consider there. And I just really am grateful that I have an opportunity to work for a community that cares about these things and that pushes their elected officials to drive progress in these areas.
Yeah, and as we're standing up the Resiliency Office, I'm really eager to hear from all of you and from across the county. The county is 67% agricultural. We have such great diversity in this county, from Ypsi to Ann Arbor, out to Manchester, Augusta. And so what is important to you, I want to have be reflected in what's important to the Resiliency Office. I'm grateful to the support that we have from the Board of Commissioners for this work. And so please feel like you can reach out to me, to our office at any time, and I'm eager to work together with you as individuals and with your municipalities.
Thank you so much. There is a 15-minute window for everyone to get out of the parking lot before the rally. There's a competition. Whoever gets out first wins. All right. Thank you, everybody. My name's Robert. I'm actually